All right, and for a more in-depth look at diversity amongst U.S. investors and entrepreneurs, we're joined by Denmark West. He's an advisor at K1 Capital. Denmark, so good to have you back with us. Thanks for joining us.
Thanks for having me.
Denmark, as we just saw in Mark News' report, African Americans very underrepresented in the world of venture capital. In fact, just 1% of seed and Series A funding in the U.S. goes to African American entrepreneurs. That's according to CB Insights. What's the number one reason for this?
So I think that there's a larger issue of inclusion that's a challenge for venture capital as a whole, at least when you think about Silicon Valley. That same report, I believe, said that only 8% goes to women and less than 1% goes to Latino founders. So the question is really a larger one around inclusion, which includes a question of pipeline as well as some questions around the meritocracy that is claimed.
But is it also a case that you just have fewer women, fewer African Americans, fewer Hispanics applying for this capital in the first place, therefore their percentage is proportionately low in getting it?
So I think that that is absolutely a valid point. And so that's the pipeline point. I think that there are fewer. But if you actually account for the pipeline, you're still getting underrepresentation. So the issue quickly becomes, well, what other than pipeline is going to be the challenge? And some of it is going to be around preparation. Some of it's actually going to be around language. Some of it's going to be around familiarity. If you think about what makes people comfortable, especially when you think about venture capitalists, what makes people comfortable is, where did you go to school? Where did you work and what's your experience? And do you know people that I know? And when you're coming from any of those three groups that I mentioned, frequently you're not going to fall into at least the do you know who I know? And in some cases, you're not even going to fall into did I work in the place that I recognize or did I go to a school?
So it's a networking situation, really, is the number one reason.
That's a big part of it. I do think that there is a legitimate pipeline question, but I think networking is also a part of the problem.
Well, why do few Americans choose to go the startup route? Why do we have a pipeline problem?
So I think that there's a few challenges around the pipeline problem in terms of startups. And one, I think, is actually being addressed by the accelerators and incubators when you think about people like Y Combinator. But a part of it is just a knowledge gap. If you think about, who are the people that would actually start companies and what is their focus and how do they think about what they're going to do? And in many cases, they don't understand what's required and they don't understand what the opportunity looks like. And so they actually don't get into it. They say, well, you know what? I am probably a little bit more risk averse coming out of college. I'm probably going to stay in a position at a tech company when I get in it as opposed to trying to leave and start a company, which a lot of their peers do.
Well, there's definitely a lot of risk involved, but we see that the majority of VCs and startups, at least these days, are tech-focused. And there seems to be tremendous underrepresentation in the tech sector. Some of the big names released their diversity stats recently. Google, Facebook, LinkedIn, Pinterest, Yahoo. They all had less than 2% African-American employees. Why are we seeing such a slow or low participation rate in the tech space amongst African-Americans?
So I think that that's actually one of the questions that Jesse Jackson has been raising at a lot of the shareholder meetings because the numbers are actually a little bit out of whack when you think of the non-technical jobs also being underrepresented. So if you're saying that you're having a problem finding the engineers, you know what? People are willing to have that conversation and are willing to work on the pipeline. If you're saying you're having a hard time finding marketers, MBAs, legal people, then that's a more challenging conversation.
Well, do you think that it's a question of education, of getting people more interested in this kind of career choice? What can be done to change this?
So I think part of it is a question of outreach. So I think that there is a very tight recruiting band when you think about where do I go for entry-level positions. Very similar to the finance industry and other industries where they say, well, look, I've got a list of, call it 10 colleges where I like to go. Some of it's just going to be around outreach. I think the other piece is around just putting out more education about what's available.
Well, a lot of initiatives are happening now. Our Harvard Business School alumni program launched the Venture Capital Access Program that's focused specifically on helping women and minorities raise capital. And there are other minority-led venture funds. So the question is that a good idea? One could argue that that is perpetuating defining people on the basis of race or gender by choosing to allocate resources on those factors rather than looking at the merit, rather than looking at the potential viability of the venture or the potential return on investment.
Right. And so I think one of the challenges with that argument is that it assumes that you're actually in an efficient market today. And that doesn't recognize the pretty clear blind spots that exist within Silicon Valley. A simple example that's not race or gender based. Silicon Valley tends to not invest in content. They say that that's not where they tend to focus. It's not a scalable activity, but yet LA does. And LA invests in companies like Maker, which recently sold to Disney for somewhere between $500 million and $1 billion, which would point to the fact that there's actually going to be situations where the places where people don't focus, for whatever the reason, could still represent an opportunity. And so what we will see over time is whether this is actually true or not. My guess is that there is actually a blind spot in more places than just content.
But people like you are doing something to fix that.
Indeed, I am.
All right. Well, thank you so much, Genoa Quest, advisor at K1 Capital.